Hi, Freddie. Welcome to my podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to see you again, Dheeraj. You and I have gone through many seasons together, as they say.
Yes, yes, from Beijing to Shanghai to Hong Kong to India and
To
all these
India.
places. Yeah,
Exactly. And I see that you're
yeah.
doing well. Your hair is a little longer. It looks good.
Thank you, Freddie. And you've turned into Dr. Freddie, right? I mean, wow.
My kids are teasing
Yeah.
me to no ends, as you can imagine. Whenever we go to a restaurant, they'll say, table for Dr. Freddie. Just to keep it real so they
Yeah.
know I cannot get a hot head.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, Freddie, and that's an interesting segue into our conversation, right? I mean, you, Freddie, obviously spend a lot of time in Asia building brands as a strategist with brands such as Twitter, Microsoft, now Visa, right? But what's more interesting is that you went back to do PhD and to do a thesis in leadership,
That's right.
right? And I do believe that it's to do beyond than your fancy of putting a nice doctor name behind your behind your credentials. And I mean, I have to tell you that I am a sucker for academia as well, right? I mean, whenever I'm going to do a class or do something about my book, and I see those red brick walls and big halls, I'm like, oh my god, I want to come back and I want to study. But it's a mixed feeling, right? It's a mixed feeling because then I also see a lot of what's being taught, and with no kind of a disrespect to a lot of work which is going through academia in parts, and I'm like, how out of touch is some bit of that from the real life, from what you and I have been doing in practice, and we see. I can certainly talk that about a lot of marketing theories, right? I mean,
Right.
for
It's true.
example, right from the beginning when we were growing up, and the whole idea of differentiation, for example, I mean, it's been drilled down so much into our heads, and especially working in markets in Asia, building new brands, building startup brands. One of the biggest realization is it's not about differentiation; it's about relevance, right?
Absolutely.
And how do you get that back to young kids being taught and so on and so forth? Now that's about marketing. I wanted to pick your thoughts on why did you go back to do a PhD in leadership? What prompted you to do that?
Well, Dheeraj, I was just infinitely jealous of your book tour, and I thought I've got to match him somehow.
Yes.
You and I, we have always been, I think, sort of intellectual brains, and all joking aside, I think it's about having a growth mindset, wanting to
Yeah.
learn, and I think I've said this to you also is once a planner, always a planner at heart. You're fascinated by consumer insights. You're fascinated by the world around you, and you want to understand what's going on. And it's very analogous to what you just talked about. For me, I was in a few leadership positions throughout the years, and it just sort of bugged me that a lot of the things that I would get taught when I'd go back, to leadership class, or sometimes, quite frankly, when the bosses would address us, that there'd be a lot of rubbish that was talked about in terms of leadership. So I started really questioning a lot of the myth around this heroic leadership that was really prevalent in a lot of the top universities I got to go to. And one of my seminal moments was when I took a class at Harvard, which was on leadership. And I was really struck by how they were teaching leadership in relation to power, individualism, and also very strong gender divide, how women lead, how men lead. And it just felt really at odds to me with how I wanted to lead, how I had seen other great leaders lead, and also what I was experiencing in Asia. And I really felt that that could be a different way of leading and also talking about leadership. And so I thought, why not go back to school? That's when I decided to enter Pepperdine's PhD program in Los Angeles. They had a unique program on global leadership and change. So looking at theories of leadership, but also theories of change, which is very important because leadership is about, producing change. In the same way that we like to produce change in behaviors and minds and hearts and marketing. And so that started my journey, 3 years of intense classes, 1 year of dissertation writing. And I have to say, it's been really the highlight of my life. I have been so scared. I was in my late 40s, and in the program, I had a gentleman who was in his 60s and a young girl who was 23. And I just thought, how am I going to keep up? This is going to be really
Yeah.
hard. But it was a really, really great mix, super diverse group of people from all over the world. And I just learned so much from them. And I learned so much about myself. And it's really redefined how, I've been leading with my teams. But also, it's actually given me some new ideas on marketing too, which we can talk about later. And
Yeah.
I never thought that, being a scholar in leadership studies would also help me think about my trade in a different way. So it's been really rich, and it's a very humbling journey actually, because you're not really learning leadership. You're really learning about yourself, your origin story, your values, and sort of how you show up every day. And do you show up as this person who's pushing others and pulling them and telling them what to do, or are you showing up to really inspire them in new ways? And one
Yeah.
of the quotes that I sign off my emails with is, leaders open up the sky for others to soar in. And if I had to give a definition of leadership, that to me is really where it
Yeah.
sits at.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. And we'll come to that a lot more, Freddie, in this conversation. I want to start with the whole premise where your thesis is embedded in Asia, right? And the whole idea of how a new idea of leadership is being invented in Asia. And you and I have been mapping Asia for a bit now, both culturally, from marketing, branding, advertising perspective, and we recognize that Asia is different, right? It is different. It's far more textured. It's far more interconnected. It's far about the collective, right? It is about the individual, but it has a unique sense of what we call I within we, right?
True.
And we've been mapping those textures. We've been building brands in these markets. I mean, I personally feel, for example, say for in marketing and business, right? Brands have to take a very different kind of leadership in Asia.
True.
You realize that young brands which have just been born are actually able to straddle purpose right from the beginning, right? I mean, that doesn't really happen from a Western marketing and business philosophy. They'll tell you, oh, first you launch your brand, get your physical attributes noted, and once you've got on the maturing curve, think about purpose. And we've seen, especially in markets, emerging markets such as India, Indonesia, etc., the poor people actually want purpose,
Yes,
right? They
that's
want
it's a
respect. And
fascinating
yeah,
point. You're right in
yeah,
terms of
yeah.
the stages of the brands, and also them recognizing their citizen contribution and then setting up those brands more from a societal perspective from the beginning as opposed to just for profit. So you're absolutely right.
Yes, yes. So talk to us about, why do you say that Asia is where a new idea of leadership is being invented, and what are your theories around that idea?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, first of all, let me disclose that I'm European. So the way I approached this dissertation was not as an Asian expert myself, but more as a person landing on the moon and trying to understand the whole universe around me. I've lived in Asia for 15 years. My parents were based in China. My mother was born in Vietnam, but I myself am not Asian. So I do want to say that because I'm quite aware of my positionality within the
Yeah.
realm of the research. But I have had, a bit of help. So just a little bit on the background of the research. What I wanted to do was to really provide a fresh and different perspective of leadership within the Asia region. Part of it was because there was so little that was published. And back to the very first point, even in my studies, in my PhD, which was very good, there was very little literature that I could rely on when I'd say, well, who's written the sort of the book on leadership in Asia? There was not much, just a few white papers here and there. So that was, the premise, as you say, is to go and search where I was living and try to document that. For my dissertation, I did an analysis of the leadership literature for about the last century. So you'll find a very extensive literature review in my chapter 2 for those of you who are very brave and want to read 400 pages or perhaps want to fall asleep.
They're,
You
they're
can,
for this they're for this podcast, Freddie, so that they can get the gist of it in a few minutes.
exactly. You can find my dissertation by just doing a Google search under my name under Frederique Corbett, connectivist leadership, which is the term I've given to this form of leadership, which is more connected, humanly and digitally connectivist leadership. But I conducted 42 one-on-one in-depth interviews, 29 with research participants based in the Asia region, in Singapore, China, India, and Indonesia, which I clustered according to the Globe Research definition into Confucian Asia and the Southern Asia cluster. And I also talked to 13 global leading experts in network learning and leadership and in Asian studies who were located all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's really impressive to
Yeah.
be able to access these people. And, some of these leading global experts are very famous. They remain under anonymity, but they've written, many books
Yeah, I
and
mean, what's
challenging them.
fascinating, yeah, and what's fascinating about this, Freddie, is that you are bringing live, real learnings from the world as it's happening, right? I mean, that's what this dissertation then brings to the table for all of us.
It's a
Yeah,
very good point because my study was done last summer, in the very middle of COVID. And that wasn't planned. You plan a dissertation for years and years.
yeah,
And then, I think the resulting context of that time just so heightened certain things that were already going on and just really helped put the lens on them. And I can talk about that in a bit. But, the most important thing was that leadership in Asia is not the same as leadership anywhere else.
mm,
And there is a certain manner of Asian leadership, although that is, again, a wide sweeping generalization. There are obviously a lot of differences in Northern Asia and in the Confucian cluster and the Southern cluster. But at a glance, it is possible to say that there is some fundamental changes. And one of the things that really struck me when I was doing my research is how I said before, there was very little on that, but also how we're really in a moment in time that we're calling, so the Asianized world. So McKinsey's documented that the world economy is really going through massive disruption. We've got the shift of the world activity to the east. It's been going on for quite a few years. The acceleration of technology change, which is also very, very omnipresent in Asia. An aging population and a young population, depending on different parts of Asia. And a lot of the concentration of flow, capital, people, and data is happening in Asia, not to mention now the COVID post-recovery,
yeah,
which is happening very strongly, out of
yeah,
China. And so, I think there's this Western bias that, Asia was always the factory of the world. And then what I saw was actually, for all of these reasons, Asia's centrality now is massively evidenced through a lot of these changes, demographic, economic, and technological. And I talk about a new geography of leadership. And to me, that's a very important finding, which is, we're really talking about leadership being based from different cultural foundations and leadership that can transcend this singular Western-centric model that we have. And a lot of the traditions that have sort of permeated our ideas around leadership, which some theorists, honestly, have talked about as a cultural and ideological form of even colonialism, right?
yeah,
Right. And so there's very, very different things that we see. And I think these will resonate to people who are not scholars. The Western leadership literature talks about leadership that is very individualistic
yeah,
versus collectivist approach that we experience in Asia, or a rationality and a very sort of prescriptive way of doing leadership versus a much more harmonious way of leading. A performance orientation as opposed to in Asia, more of a family and a
yeah,
holistic orientation,
yeah,
right? Obviously, individual outcomes being much more important than group outcomes. Even when you look at like performance ratings, right? It's all about me, versus, in Asia, did the
yes,
team do well? Did we succeed together? And then there's so much more to be said there. But, another thing that I found really interesting is the redefinition also of followers. In the West, a follower is someone who's just being told what to do and's got to follow you, versus in Asia, followers are actually participants and they're
yeah,
integral to your success. They
yeah,
are the reason the team succeed. So there's a lot of very different reasons that, I think lend us to believe that it is the right time for Asia to be a center of research on leadership. And
Yeah.
it's no longer just an exporter of goods and services, but it is a place where leadership is being reinvented. And I think that is incredibly exciting. And I would encourage all my fellow scholars to come here and to study and to publish more on what's happening in this part of the world.
Yeah. No, this is so fascinating. And, going back to my personal experience, I mean, what we've done, Freddie, at Leo Burnett is we created a platform of top 50 leaders, right? I mean, that's a lot, right? I mean, my HR keeps coming and telling me that that's a lot. I mean, you're just kind of democratizing leadership far too much, right? Why
That's
don't you
good.
have
That's good.
yeah,
We need
why don't
that.
you why don't you have just a few 4 or 5 people in there? And I'm like, no, I need the engine to be a bigger engine, right? And what we did, Freddie, was we built a platform, right? So every Tuesday we operationalize. Every Tuesday 50 of us get on a call. It's 10:30 every Tuesday morning. Everybody knows, right? We get on a call and we have a conversation about where we are headed, what's troubling us, what could we be doing. uh, we know everybody who's going through what, and so on and so forth. So 1 hour conversation, more than the issues we discuss. And of course we make a lot of decisions jointly and democratically. But it's the energy, right? It's the energy of everybody coming together shoulder to shoulder and saying, come what may, we will take this ship forward, right? And there's not be a single call that me and my partner have missed these Tuesdays, because come what may, whatever happens, we're so energized to get to these calls, right? So making this whole thing democratic has been such a great experience. And as we speak, because of COVID, I mean, we gave away our old office, which was hierarchical, because while everybody had a flat office, but the CEO's office had 1/4 of the real estate. And now we are making an office which is no designated seats, right? And we are building various nodes to the office. There's a jungle node, and there's a
Oh,
cafeteria node, and there's
love
a
that.
media center node.
Yeah.
And you could come and work out of any node in the office. We are building an Olympic size running track around the office, right? And the whole idea again is that, how do you democratize the energy of the office so that there's not one epicenter physically to the office which radiates, but there are multiple epicenters, and people build that epicenters. I mean, my brief to the architect was, build me the largest coffee shop in the country, because a coffee shop doesn't have its own color, right? It gives an environment to the conversation about the people who walk into the coffee shop. It doesn't judge you whether you're a philosopher or a writer or a business person, right? It allows you the comfort of that conversation. So just because we are a creative agency, I didn't want yellow walls and orange chairs, right? I actually wanted a neutral office which allows these conversations. So there's been fairly interesting experience that I've had of building what you call a much more democratized, a much more team enabled leadership style rather than an individual or a heroic leadership style. But I have to tell you, Freddie, it's not easy doing this.
Mm.
And very often, I mean, I'm being pushed by people or myself that, because the other leadership style is about the leader has to take all the decisions. If you're
Yeah.
not making the decisions, you're not being leadership enough. Oh, are you devaluing your authority, and so on and so forth. So there is mentally a constant struggle in terms of how democratic do you want to make it, and how much control do you want to keep in your hands. And therefore I want to discuss with you this whole idea that you have of, team enabled and a much more what you call blockchain kind of a framework of leadership than a heroic and a leader enabled format of leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to touch on what you said because I think it's phenomenal, and it's great to see practitioners that are bringing to life the concept of connectivist leadership. So I just
Yeah.
want to commend you. One of the things that our listeners will probably pick up on is the type of language that you use when you're defining this leadership, right? You talked about epicenter, you talked about nodes, you talked about democracy. It's a very different kind of language and different kinds of concepts versus power, influence, domination, centralization, right? And so that I think is extremely noteworthy in itself, because the way that we're constructing this connectivist leadership understanding is actually through a lot of the concepts of technology and the learning theory of connectivism, which essentially has said, with the advent of technology, our brains are learning in a completely new way. The way that knowledge is being constructed is transformed. And leadership is this democratized leadership is just a manifestation of that, right? And you use the word blockchain. I mean, this is something that came out through one of my interviews. I had a number of respondents when I was asking them to describe this kind of leadership. They said, well, it's leadership on a blockchain. It's
Yeah.
completely distributed on the outer edges of my personal network. I might work with consultants or freelance people anywhere around the world. They're like nodes, they're human nodes on a network. And they're distributed, right? And I can bring them in depending on the different kinds of projects. And people are working more in sprints and in small teams, which you see a lot in the agile literature. But I think what the dissertation also overlaid is that there is a lot more emotion to this kind of leadership. And we can talk about that. What happens is leadership becomes decentralized and is no longer the purview of the one heroic leader who tells others what to do, who has this single vision, and everybody is, sort of following, enslaved to that one person. We see much more sort of distributed visioning also, and teams becoming sort of co-creators in the leadership. And, there was a lot of fascinating language that I came across in describing this change of leadership. Some of my respondents said, well, because I interviewed both leaders and people in teams, they said, well, I don't like the idea of followers anymore. Like, no one's a leader or a follower. Everyone's just a participant. I thought, wow, that's beautiful. And sure, we have to make decisions, but it's no longer possible for one person to have the knowledge of everything. Therefore, decisions also have to be taken with those nodes and those experts. So I have to reach out to other team members who are participants into my knowledge network to make the right calls. Otherwise, I will be making mistakes. So there's a lot of sort of context around the change in the way that we learn, the change in the way that technology has happened, that helps understand some of the things that you're describing. But I appreciate that you said it was hard. I think that's really important. What we see is that, I interviewed some university professors and they were like, I like having the power in my class. It's a good thing, It's
easier.
hard.
It's easier.
It's easier, right?
Yeah.
And, there is quite a lot of extensive literature that talks about how to avoid, chaos in that system. And I'm sure a lot of listeners would say, well, that sounds good, but it's probably baloney. Doesn't there need to be one person who decides? Actually, that not necessarily. I think teams can make very good collaborative decisions together, but people need to understand their role on the network itself, right? There's people who are experts, there are people who are the connectors and bring the experts in. And many of the leaders I talk to define their roles more as sort of chief people officer, chief people network officers.
I call myself chief energy officer.
That's beautiful. Tell us more about that. Why is that?
Yeah, no, it's about. I mean, I feel that if you can keep the energy of the organization, right, the entropy of the organization up, right, everything gets solved because people bring themselves, they bring their energy. I mean, if you look at just the COVID year, while many agencies kind of degrew by say 30%, they had to let go of people. I mean, at my agency, the COVID impact was not more than 5%. Right, we had no salary cuts and we did not let anybody go because of COVID reasons. And that's not because of me, it's because people stood up and they took the energy, the charge in their hands, and they say, sure as hell we'll get through this. right? Everybody stood up and they fought. I mean, and you can understand, Freddie, because I mean, we have 450 people. Not everybody is privileged to have an amazing work from home condition. People
Of
are
course.
struggling with internet. They're struggling with places to work with. I had this thing called chai with Dheeraj, which means tea with Dheeraj, right? And I used to go down and talk in bunches of 10 with everybody that I would otherwise not meet, right? And some of those stories were amazing because sometimes people are not having time for lunch, or you could see that somebody sitting in a very thin, narrow corridor with all the cleaning material behind his or her back. I mean, so people were logging in from all kinds of environments and situations, but making things happen because they were energized for a common purpose, which they bought into, not because they thought that they're doing it for somebody else. In fact, we had a town hall, and somebody commented that never before in a town hall we've heard words like family and love.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
that's beautiful. I want to kind of stay on that because I think there are sort of two sets of findings. As on the one hand, we're really seeing this decentralized leadership approaches that take on the characteristics of networks and communities, right? So they exhibit these these distinctions. So it's about fostering cooperation, exchange, mutual value, diversity, favoring diversity of opinions, openness, creating connections, different perspectives, and interactivity. So that's very sort of similar to what's happening into the networking language itself. But then on the
yeah,
other hand, there's a lot of these new human dimensions that we saw, which I think you've beautifully talked about: love, emotion, and I had so much of that in my research, in
yeah,
the desire to lead differently, not just from heroic paradigm to a distributed leadership form. There was also a different kind of emotion. And people were saying, we want leadership to bring something different to the party, this humanity, this emotion. And I love that you use the word love. I'm reading someone's dissertation right now, which is on the opportunity of bringing love into the organizational construct when it's actually been forbidden before, right? Oh, God forbid
yeah,
you fall in love with a
yeah,
colleague or you love someone.
yeah,
And the dissertation is beautiful. I mean, it opens by saying, how is it that love is a fundamental human need? And the one place where we spend most of our time, we sort of band it off as no
yeah,
good. And what would happen if we start to really love our teams and love our colleague and love
yeah.
what we do? I think that's going to open up a whole new set of opportunities for leadership also. And I think it's wonderful that you've used that word. So I really commend you. It's humane oriented leadership at a completely different, compassionate and generous level.
Yeah, in a very energizing conversation about how leadership is shaping. And while we've been instinctively experiencing and kind of implementing some of this, what makes me extremely happy is that now finally we are putting it down as theories, right? And there's proof that something like this works, rather than something like this being just a figment of imagination of a few people who are trying to drive this change, and not being sure whether you're doing the right thing by kind of deriding all that you're reading otherwise. uh, so that's the great aspect
You
of
could
this
just say, Dr.
conversation.
Freddie said it's okay.
Yes, said Dr. Freddy. Very soon. The other aspect I want to touch upon, Freddie, is this idea of purpose, right? And we spoke about this. I mean, a lot of work I have done in the emerging markets, right? I in fact realized that the Maslow's hierarchy didn't work in Asia, right? Because the Maslow hierarchy says that you have to be first satisfied with your functional needs, and only then do you get to, self-actualization and so on and so forth. I mean, you look at markets like India, China, a lot of markets in Asia. I mean, consumers want both simultaneously, right? I mean, we have examples of why a cheap car like Nano failed because it was being presented like a cheap car. Or we have examples like how one of the spiritual gurus, Baba, launched a 10,000 crore FMCG brand Patanjali on the back of yoga, right? So the poor people were buying cornflakes from on the basis of yoga, which they didn't buy from a Western brand such as Kellogg's, right? So there's a lot of work in these markets where And you look at the religious texts, you look at the learning of life. I mean, goes down. It's all prevalent through all strata of the life. It's not a privilege of just a few. So purpose as an idea, to my mind, in markets such as Asia, right, is all pervasive. I mean, the whole idea of karma, for example, in Hinduism, right? I mean, and it's not a privilege of just a few. It's everybody's domain. So I would imagine that a lot of that also percolates back to the principles of leadership, right? Because I'm sure organizations want to do something together collectively beyond just capitalist ends. And what's been your finding and your theory in that zone, Freddie?
Yeah, I mean, like, first of all, let me just say that, everybody seems to have purpose on their lips. And, when I went into this study, I did not ask people about purpose. I was not expecting to hear anything about purpose. My primary objective was to study leadership the way it's done in Asia and understand um, what was going on in the way that teams and leaders were leading, and if there was something different in terms of characteristics and drivers. And I didn't even have a purpose probe in there. So I do want to say that up front, because now purpose becomes so fashionable. Every brand has a
Yeah. There's so
purpose.
much work, yeah, work advertising around it, right? Just whitewash anything with purpose.
Exactly. Like, I talked to my team
Yeah,
about not doing purpose washing because I'm very,
yeah,
very worried about that. So I do want to disclose that, but purpose did come through so strongly in my research. First of all, let me touch upon what I think is a Western-based assumption on the Maslow pyramid, and a little bit, I think, a bit of a dismissive view of the world, which is, they're sort of like the poor people who just need to manage their livelihoods, and sorry, they're going to
yeah,
get stuck at the bottom of the pyramid. And then you can reach some state of enlightenment and self-actualization. And I love the fact that, again, being, in Asia, you can bring different ways of thinking, different models, and say, well, actually, no, these two things can happen at the
yes,
same time, right? And that's very much what I found in my research. What I found was that as people were describing their new strategies for leading, which were not heroic centric, right? They were about creating startup culture, challenging traditions, being more adaptable, bringing creativity, transparency, what some of them call like an everything mindset to the way they were working. It was actually resulting into a new level of connectivity of people in the teams, right? And as people were connecting, the consequences of those no longer heroic leadership ways of leading was that there was more empathy, there was more connectivity, there was more hope for what they were trying to create together, and leadership became much more of a force for good and a force for something better. And it wasn't, because they were trying to, bring to life the leader heroic vision, right? It wasn't that. It was because together they felt like they were doing something more important at the top of that
yeah,
pyramid. And then that's when the word purpose started to come out.
yeah,
People were like, well, what it is? It's actually a leadership that allows everybody to create a common purpose for themselves and give meaning to why they're at work, because we all want to feel that we're doing something better, which then brought into this whole new area that I wasn't expecting and wasn't even in one of my research questions, which was this feeling that there is a new end game for leadership. So not only has leadership transformed in the way that the process itself works, right, from this heroic centric to a distributed form, the end goal itself is to do something different. People
yeah,
want there to be a greater societal purpose
yeah,
from their business activity, right? It's leadership for shared purpose. It's leadership for human bond. It's a more humane way of thinking about leadership. And I have to say that what got me excited is you find very little of that in the Western literature. But when I contrasted that to my literature review in Asia, there was quite a lot. And actually, Jack Ma has been very articulate about
yeah,
that. It's talking about how leadership is really entering a new era, a new wisdom, and it's all about the people. So that was a very unexpected
yeah,
place for the dissertation that just landed me into, so this new end game, that is really what people are looking for. And then once that was described, other things, sort of came to the forefront, which is I want to feel different about my relationship to humanity. And when I work with someone, I don't want to be in a task-oriented relationship. I want to create something with that person and for society, for the people around me. And it was really, really beautiful, and much more altruistic, in fact.
Yeah, yeah. That's fantastic. I mean, the other thing that I wanted to discuss with you, Freddie, is this whole idea of young people, right? In our
Mm.
organizations, how do you lead them? I mean, I remember, I mean, when I was growing up and I wanted to be a strategist, and I was told, forget it. I mean, you won't get a job in planning and advertising till you have some gray hair. And I got into planning very, very young, and I used to wear oversized shirts, right? Just to look substantial and older, that people will listen to me. And I remember I was a trainee, and I put together an entire pitch, and I landed up at the pitch, and then the account director came out and said, boy, the senior guys are saying, what's an intern doing in this meeting, and you got to go back home, and do you have money for taxi? I still remember that
That's,
incident.
that would never happen today, because I
Yeah,
think today people would say, we're so glad you brought the
yeah,
intern to the meeting. What does
yes,
he have to say? We want to
yeah.
hear from him.
So when I started shaping the agency, I said, you know what, I want an hourglass structure. So I want leaders and I want young people. I don't want the middle, right? And I want to empower the young people. And there was a bit of a resistance that, oh no, he's young or she's young. And I'm like, but we do not hire sub 18, right? We hire anybody who's greater than 18, and these are people who are doing startups. They're changing the world. Why would we not put them in front of the client? Why would we not put them in front? And what's happened, Freddie, is that at Leo Burnett, we have a remarkable suite of youngsters who are absolutely amazing. I mean, they are out there making presentations, winning pitches, building innovations, absolutely doing amazing, right? And we grow them. I mean, 3 years they become career directors, or VPs or whatever. I mean, so they have a discontinuous path as well. But it's taken a bit of a pushing through, with a slightly more traditional mindset, which would say, oh, let them grow through the ranks, and let this not get upset. I do understand a large part of your thinking also on leadership about Asia is because Asia is young and it's technologically connected. What's been your finding in that zone?
Yeah, and again, I think it's wonderful to hear your story, and I do think things have changed tremendously.
Yes.
And I would say to our listeners, if you don't have a reverse mentor who's Gen Z, go and get one right away.
Yeah.
I have one, and I
Yeah.
ask her, what am I doing wrong? What am I not thinking
Yeah.
about?
Oh, I
It's
have to
very
tell you
important.
a quick story. So we have this young guy who's got a million followership on Insta, and we were in a pitch, and the CMO asked, guys, I've never got my social media strategy right, and he said, but you have me. So
There you
that's
go.
the confidence they come from. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that came through as a vector for why leadership was being so transformed in Asia was youth. It was a really big vector. So there's sort of three vectors. One is culture. This place in the world having a different kind of cultural environment where there's a lot more family-based relationship. It's very collaboration oriented. And there's a much more holistic view of our relationships across work and play. So the culture creates a bedrock for much more of a collaborative, connectivist
Yeah.
leadership, right? But the other was youth, right? And youth was really huge. Actually, whether it's in places like Japan that don't have that many youth, but who are really trying to kind of transform their world, thinking, well, otherwise, the culture is going to die. So I've got to really change things.
Yeah.
Or very youth-driven markets like India and Indonesia that I had a chance to talk to. What we saw is that youth was really, really pushing the boundaries. They do not want leadership the way that you and I have experienced it and the way that it's being taught. And they're not afraid to say so. They have a very different perspective about work, first of all. For them, work is about collecting a portfolio of experiences, right?
Yes.
So I'm just collecting experiences, and I will go to whatever place I can get those experiences. I'm not interested in the tenure. I'm not even interested in the salary. It's learning as a portfolio. So that's a huge, huge insight for why then as a result, you better treat them differently and give them
Yeah.
valuable roles.
And
Otherwise,
give
they're,
them challenge. Yeah.
yeah,
The day
they're
they
just going to
feel
leave.
not challenged, they're going to go. Yeah.
They're going to go. The other thing is they're very values driven, right? So they've been brought up in a time when, you know, it's open network, Facebook, all of you know, social networking as just a default for their life. And so they're used to transparency. So this notion of, you know, the boss doing performance reviews in a closed room, that doesn't work
Yeah.
for them
That
at
doesn't work.
all.
Yeah.
You know, they
Yeah.
want transparency in everything, even leveling. I mean, you know, titles they think is ridiculous. Well, what makes this person more senior than me? A senior director? What does that mean? I have the expertise, that person doesn't.
Yeah.
Why are they more senior than me? So titles don't work for them either. And they're very much values driven. That is something that I thought was so fascinating. So they hold their leaders and their teams to great account. If they feel the team is not living according to the values that they deem are important, then they just don't want to work for that company or for that person at all. And they'll just walk out. So it creates a whole different level of accountability. You know, the minute the CEO is cheating or trying to hide something, or even their manager
Yeah.
is not aligned, they
That's a
want
deal breaker. Yeah.
it's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
So as a result, you know, I had a lot of leaders say, "Oh my God, it's so difficult managing young people. I don't know how to be a leader for
Yeah.
this new generation." But I think this new generation is absolutely an engine and a catalyst of that transformation in bringing you know, these new requirements: a
Yeah.
values-based environment, purposeful work, learning as a portfolio, collecting experiences, and wanting a lot more out of work. That has nothing to do with just money, status, and things like that, which, by the way, in another conversation we could talk about, is also the same transformation as all of the financial sectors going through, where
Yeah.
they're not interested in the platinum card. That's not it, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, culture, youth, and then of course technology that I talked about are sort of these three concentric circles that really come together to provide a unique position for Asia in shifting leadership.
Yeah. I think, and to my mind, the best technique that I have managed to manage this is authenticity and honesty. I mean, if I don't know, I don't know. It's okay. It's all right to say I don't know, and ask for help. And more often than not, people have stood up and solved it when I didn't know how to solve it.
Yeah, and recognizing them as your nodes, as your expert nodes. That's the other thing,
Yes.
is they love to be recognized as the experts and then brought into this human network, connected
Yeah.
with each other and creating something that's, you know, ultimately purposeful. And you'll see very often times, you know, you work with those young people, they're less inclined to ask you how, but they will ask you why again and again. But
Yes.
why? But why
Yeah.
are we doing this? And why will it
Yeah.
be meaningful? Why will it
Yeah.
have value? You better have answers for that, because
Yeah.
otherwise they're not going to want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, I mean, we can keep on talking about leadership, Freddie, but I don't want to let you go without having a bit of a conversation about marketing and brands, because
That's great
that's
too.
that's where both of us come from, right? So how does all of this, and with your experience of building fairly new age brands in Asia, right? Uh, how does all of this add up to marketing and branding, and what's your experience been there? I mean, I have, for example, now over a period of time, gathered our own. So we have our own principles of what works in Asia. I mean, for example, we've learned very, very clearly that in Asia, to succeed, you have to be a leader brand, right? You have to own the change. You have to guide it. No matter where you debut, you could have debut at number 6, number 7, doesn't matter. But you come into the market and you begin to own the change. You begin to do whatever it takes to build that category. Right. So that's one big learning for us. The second big learning that I spoke about is the idea of relevance. I mean, there's enough for everybody to eat, right? Consumers are not waking up in the morning comparing how is this particular platform better than the other platform. They're waking up saying, is this relevant to me? Do you do anything that I care about? Right. So differentiation
Absolutely.
is not so important, but relevance is hugely important, because you are building newer markets. It's not a share gain game. It's building new market kind of a game. We've also learned, Freddy, is that you got to stay very sharply connected to the key drivers of the category and the central
Mm.
drivers of the category, and not go down and own the 10th most important driver just for the sake of being different. People don't care. People really don't care, right? I mean, whatever you stand for, please deliver that at the heart of it. So these have been some of our learnings, and we've now been building a lot of brands, especially brands such as Amazon, Spotify, around these principles in this market. Would love to hear your take on what's shaping up in your mind around what works for brands and businesses in these markets.
I think these are wonderful, and sort of at a higher level, how to take some of these leadership transformations that I talked about, and thinking about them through the marketing lens. I think there's a lot of relevance. So as much as we were talking about sort of the heroic leader leading by example in leadership before, it's the same thing with brands. It's not so much about the leader brand and positioning the brand, right? It's actually about catalyzing collective action in the
Yeah,
same way that leadership has to work, right? So before, leadership and brand building was all about building profile, building reputation. But today I would say it's about accelerating change, and it's really about mobilizing.
yeah,
So you can see how the parallels are extremely interesting. Similarly, leadership and branding was all about stakeholders as receivers and recipients. But today we see that brands need to manage the wider stakeholders, not just the shareholders, right? And they have to treat their customers as participants, on a network. They
yeah,
have to create partnerships, and they really have to find those collective movements for people to want to be part of their story. And in very specific terms, I had a conversation recently with my team where we were talking about taglines, and someone on the team said, "Well, why do we need a tagline anymore?
yeah,
Isn't that very self-centered? Isn't that the
yeah,
old way of branding where I'm talking about me? Why would we need a tagline?" I just thought that was such a fascinating and
yeah,
provocative
absolutely, yeah,
question.
yeah,
Maybe you don't want a tagline, maybe you want more of a collective call to action to do
yeah,
something together. Or similarly, BCG talks about, really going from brand positioning to brand stance. What is your stance? What do you
yeah,
believe in? What do
yeah,
you want to change in the world?
yeah,
Isn't that more important than just positioning or finding your difference?
yeah,
Because if you're relevant, then you will be meaningful. So there's a lot of, the tricks that, again, I think we've learned in marketing school. I'm sure they're taught still, that you probably have to question, do I need to position? Is that enough? Or do I need to find my stance? Do I need my tagline, or do I need to mobilize? So I think we're at a fascinating time to be in marketing. And again, that's why I think surrounding ourselves with young people is important, because they see those things. They may not even have the vernacular, so they can quickly challenge and say, well, why do we need this? Or why do we need that? Or why would we build storytelling that's all about our corporate story? What people want to hear is their story.
yeah,
How do they come into this? How does it matter to them? And so, throughout all of the marketing mix and all the tricks that we've heard, I think we're going to see a lot of change. I'll give you a story. I was talking to a 19-year-old girl the other day who was, interested in maybe becoming an intern with us. And I said to her, well, you're a little bit young, you're still in your first year, but, I'd love to hear, your experience. And she taught me so much. I mean, in that interview, I just left thinking, we've got to bring this person on. She was asking me questions like, well, have you heard about the sustainability compass? Are you doing sustainability marketing? And I'm just like,
yeah,
what's that? And she's like, well,
yeah,
E for environmental, and S for sustainable, and social and societal. And I was like, wait, I've got to write this down. And I love when that happens, because
yes,
it's not that often where whole industry can get disrupted and get to a very different place. And I do think we're sitting on the edge of the cliff, looking at how our trade is profoundly being redefined, and that's
yeah,
incredibly
yeah,
exciting.
yeah. I mean, I find, for example, the name brand manager an oxymoron, because you're not managing anymore. The brand is being managed by the people. You're not in control anymore. I mean, you were in control when there was one television spot that you ran, and that defined your brand. Not anymore. I mean,
Yeah, you need to
people
be a
are
brand
interacting.
mobilizer. That's what you
Yeah,
need to do,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And people are interacting with your brand at 12 platforms. And you could be, in fact, a little bit different on each of these platforms. So what I talk about, Freddie, is the idea of brand narrative and being platform native. So you take one narrative, but you're native to that platform, because you can't behave the way you behave on Instagram, and the same way on LinkedIn, and the same way on Twitter, and so on and so forth. But
But how
yet,
things have changed, because, 10
yeah,
years ago, we were building command centers where we were buying
yes,
technology that would allow us to
yeah,
blast one message
yeah,
on all of those platforms.
yeah,
Remember, it wasn't
yeah,
that long ago,
yes, yes,
right? And, those companies were being very successful. And now here you are talking about being, platform native. Absolutely. I mean, it's changed
yeah.
very,
For
very rapidly.
to your leadership example, right? I mean, for brands to find multiple nodes of ownership amongst people, rather than the brand to be headquartered in the brand manager's portfolio, that that as an idea is where this is all headed, to my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, with that also this notion that you can control the brand, or, I
Yeah,
don't, the CEO say, well, I don't mind being on social media, but you're just going to have to control what's being said. It's like,
yeah,
it doesn't work that way. If you're going to
yeah,
mobilize, and also if you're going to take position in a way that is more of a stance, right, which is make a difference, claim a purpose, then people are going to be watching you, and they're going to have something to say. They're going to want to, just not see if you're doing just the talking, but if you're
yeah,
doing the doing. And
yeah,
that's when we start to hear a lot of, in the industry, this talk of story doing versus
yeah,
story saying. And I think
yeah,
that that's also a very important transition, and how, as marketing professionals, we need to invest more in actions, and also innovations, making
yeah,
products, making services, which I know you guys do. I'd
yeah.
love you to talk about that, as opposed to just saying things.
Yeah. No, we did that. I mean, and I keep reading articles from very, very senior people saying, advertising has lost the art of persuasion, and the only thing advertising should do is the art of persuasion. And I feel that, every industry does a leapfrog, right? I mean, IT did a leapfrog from Y2K to products to now AI and ML. I mean, advertising needs to do that as well. Communication needs to do that as well. I don't feel that my only tools today are words and images. No, I can use creativity and map it with technology and data, and I can create real solutions. So last week, Freddie, we launched a product that we call Street Eye. Now it's a product which has been designed by Leo Burnett, and you strap it on a bike, and it points you to submerged potholes, right? So if there's a pothole coming ahead of you, it'll be able to point that out, and it'll ask you to go around it. And it is life saving, because there's so many deaths in emerging markets such as India because of monsoons and potholes, and bikers not knowing it, and they just trip, and that leads to fatalities. Now this is a product, and we are launching this with an insurance brand, right? So what better insurance than coming post, right? So it's a product innovation, gets strapped on a bike, and then obviously there'll be communication around it, but you're solving a real problem rather than just having a conversation. And
That's a
that is
real
where, yeah,
transformation, and I applaud you. That is a real leapfrog from just having trying to position to really having trying to transform and mobilize and create a
yeah,
purpose for the greater good. I love to hear that story. And incidentally, when you talked about this old mindset of shouldn't advertising be about persuasion, it's exactly analogous to leadership. Leadership was also supposed to be all about persuasion, persuading workers to do
yeah,
something in a certain way. And I argue in my dissertation with connectivist leadership that we are shifting that leadership from persuasion, coercion, and power to connection. And in
yeah,
fact, the
and
data
influence,
and influence. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
the data all points to organizations really transitioning from persuading and winning to really connecting, and
yeah,
that's a beautiful thing.
yeah. So, Freddie, I want to ask you, towards the last part of our conversation. I mean, what has meant to you being a woman leader, right? And I know that your success is not related to the gender at all. I mean, you've been a fantastic leader. You've always been transformational in every organization that you've been part of. But there's definitely learning from you for leaders like ourselves to build an organization and a culture which manages to retain and nurture and grow women leaders as well. And we do know that in many industries we need to be correcting the narrative a lot more than it's been. So would love to hear your thoughts on this, on and some advice on what we could do better.
Yeah, and it's a tough question. I pause because I feel such a sense of responsibility for what I'm going to say. To be honest, I feel that I've never led as a woman. I've led as
Yeah,
me, and that is, whether you're a woman or however you define your gender or your race or who you are. I think leading as you is the most important thing. Some of the literature talks about it as authentic leadership, bring your whole self to work. But I really think that that's true. You can't, sort of have a formulaic image of a leader, which is completely disconnected from who you truly are. You know, when I talk to my teams, I talk to them in all of the roles I have in my life. I talk to them sometimes as a mother, as a friend, as a sister, as a colleague. And I find that I have to use a lot of these roles for the various problems that, we're
yeah,
trying to resolve throughout the day, particularly in a COVID era where we've seen, very different demands on leaders, as we've talked about, more of this chief energy officer, chief people officer, to really bring that emotion, that humanity, and that love to the team. So, leading from multiple roles has really worked for me. I found that when I became a mother, it made my leadership more sophisticated. I
yeah,
became more empathetic, more nurturing. And I think we're in an incredibly lucky moment in that, there is less pressure put on women in general. Of course, it depends on places around the world, but women are more allowed to be having their own, leadership style and to bring more communication, more connectivity and more emotion in the workplace. And there's a lot of research that has been done now showing that diversity results in successful organizations. So we can bring the data
yeah,
to bear. But that's how I've done it. And I have found that the more vulnerable I've been, the more me I've been, the more
yeah,
it's worked. And I've had plenty of failures, and sometimes I've tried to put on more of a sort of strong woman image to who
yeah,
I was. It's particularly in new roles. It didn't work. It's just like, be
yeah,
yourself, just
yeah,
be your quirky self. As you said, say what you don't know, bring others to help you. That is how you create the
yeah,
fastest support system. And I've worked in pretty tough environments. I've worked in technology for most of my career, which is very
yeah,
supercharged with male egos, as well as type A folks who are very competitive and a lot of
yeah,
backstabbing. Finance is also can be a difficult environment for women. But I found that being true to yourself helps. And then creating women networks, helping
mm,
other women do well,
yeah,
surrounding yourself with great women, promoting young women. That is really, really important. Finding those reverse mentors, bringing people along with you, because then no matter what happens, that that's the legacy that you really want to build for yourself. It's not really the position you've attained, but how many people have you been able to open the sky for? And when you
yeah,
leave a job, depending on how many notes and little emails you get when people go, you've just changed this or that for me.
yeah,
You just log that in your personal private box. You go, I did something good. That's really what
yeah.
mattered.
I love that. I love that. You're saying it is about embracing all the things that you do and being one with that, right? And I love the whole idea of how many people do you open the sky for. And as a leader, even I mean, I have a cricket analogy. I tell people that I create a good pitch for you to bat, and that's my job.
That's very nice. How about the
Yeah.
velocity of the ball? Yeah, you blow also, you do the one.
Yeah, once in a while, you know. So that's a fascinating conversation, Freddie. Right, we'll take a break, and when we come back, you can take the revenge on me. You can ask me questions back, and I promise
Ooh,
I'll
good
I'll
stuff.
answer them with honesty.
All
So
right,
let's
I'll
take a
prepare.
break, and we come back.
All right. Well, I'm very excited to be able to turn the wheels on you and ask you a couple questions, Dheeraj. I guess, one of the things that I wanted to ask you was if you had the world's attention, which you might very well do with this podcast, for 30 seconds, what would be your
Yeah.
message to the world? What would you like to say?
Yeah. So it's a tough question, right? Hard not to be cliched on this. And I'm thinking about this, Freddie. This one philosophy I have, and which again borrowing from cricket, is the idea of well left, right? So the idea that you don't have to hit every ball, right?
Mm.
And a trick to a good batting career or to a good batting innings is knowing which ball to hit and which not to hit. So that's what my message to the world would be, that you don't have to hit all the balls, right? Practice the idea of well left. Hit the ones which help you make your point and make your score.
I think that's beautiful. It reminds me of something that I discussed with my daughter. She's just turned 18 and she's going off to university. So we're sort of
Yeah.
going through this moment of separation before she heads
Yeah.
off. And we're talking about what advice would I give her that I would have liked to know when I was 18. And my answer was just not to worry so much. Don't try to do
Yes.
so much. So it's very in line with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Know which ball to hit. You don't have to hit all of them,
Yeah.
and there's really a lot of beauty in that, and you can sort of be a bit more calm. There's no need to sort
Yeah.
of worry so much, right? Just
Yeah.
know where to
Yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
beautiful. So I happen to work in the finance category. I work at Visa, although it's a hybrid, right? Because we are the largest technology payment network out there. So we're actually delivering technology. It's finance and technology together. But
Yeah.
I was just curious, who do you get your finance advice from?
So I've been through this whole circuit, and we have a finance manager and somebody who guides us and all of that. But finally, Freddie, I have to tell you that I split my finance between my head and my heart. Right.
Ah,
So,
okay.
so my whole philosophy is that you live only once, right? And you got to do what you got to do. You got to do what you enjoy doing, right? And we spend so much of our life just building our careers and building our lives. We don't spend enough time living our lives, right? And I'm now giving equal allowance to my heart as I'm giving to my head. So the two people I hear a lot about on finance is both my head and my heart, and they have 50-50.
And what does your wife have to say about your allowance then? Does she give you just half?
She's given it up. She's like, you will do what you have to do. Yeah.
Well, I think that's lovely because if you're always just following logic, you would
Yeah.
prevent yourself from doing a lot of things that are seem too risky,
Yeah.
or maybe don't make sense and can give you a lot of joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that works with pure finance decisions as well, right? I mean, I have bet on my gut a lot of times, and I've come out correct.
Well,
Yeah.
people tend to forget that the market is actually also very irrational because it's done
Yes.
by humans. So
Yeah.
for all of the AI programs the traders are using, there's also the just irrationality of how people are feeling. So I think
Yeah.
that you're onto something.
Yeah.
Now, you're such an accomplished person. You've done brilliantly in your career. You were always an inspiration for me when, we were fellow planners in strategy. You've written books. You're leading, top agency in the world. What do you have left in terms of dreams you want to achieve?
Yeah, I have this whole romantic idea of sitting on a beachside, uh, villa, and writing more books, and not
Ah,
having to worry about P&L on a daily basis.
maybe you and I could go to a writing camp. My husband asked me what I wish I could do. And I said, I wish I could just go on a retreat to write a book. There's always so much to talk about, right? And to reflect. After having done 4 years of dissertation, it's like, no, you're not allowed to write anymore. So I need to escape again.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a very romantic idea of writing.
Do you have a theme for what you'd like to write on? Have you thought about it?
There are lots of ideas, Freddie. I mean, obviously now as I'm getting older and more experienced, there's a story about how I manage all of this, right? There's a story there, perhaps, and my whole small town upbringing. A lot of stuff I saw beyond advertising, marketing, business, which informed my idea on life. So there's stories there. There are obviously stories in how to build brands and businesses, but I mean, the more interesting stuff is outside them, is what I feel.
Well, I think you need to find the time to tell those Dheeraj stories. I'll be lined up to read them in the same way I've enjoyed all your other books. So that would be wonderful.
That's awesome. Thank you, Freddie. That makes a club of two. So
although my stuff I think is very boring compared to yours.
No, it's very fascinating, and I do look forward to seeing it in a book format very, very soon.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, thinking about this podcast has inspired me also to try to distill those learnings into much more of a sort of a top 10 that perhaps can be more consumable. You know, there's nothing better that happens to me when I read another one of those Harvard articles, or I get, you know, a newsletter email from a university about a leadership class, and I just see what kind of rubbish they want to teach, and I go, I've got to go out there and talk to more people and find, you know, souls like you who are thinking and doing this differently. We have a huge opportunity, you know, to really change the world and to let young leaders show us a different path. I fundamentally think that the organization of the future, and not that far away, probably 10 years from now, will look very different, and we will be measuring against a different scorecard, which has to do with the societal impact that that particular business has, rather than just, you know, the return on money. Return on purpose, I think, is really where I think it'd be nice to go.
Yeah, such a fantastic note to end this conversation here, Freddie. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and it was an amazing chat. Thank you.
It was wonderful to see you again. Can't travel for a while, but I really enjoyed it. It was just like having a cup of tea, like when we see each other. Could have talked to you all day. So thank you so much to you and to your listeners for indulging us.
Thank you, Freddie.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Freddie, do tell our listeners how they can follow you and your thoughts and all the pearls of wisdom coming out on branding, marketing, and leadership.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I would say I would like people not to follow me because, right, we just talked about the end of followership. I would like people to come and participate in the discussion and transformation of leadership with me. They can do that at my Twitter account, which is at Freddie, FREDDIE _Covey, COVI. And I also welcome people to join in the conversation on my LinkedIn page, where you can find me at Frederique Covington Corbett. All of my research papers are published under my married name, Corbett. So if you just do a Google search on Frederique Corbett, you'll find my research papers. Most of them are a bit shorter, more consumable, on connectivist leadership. There's a lot of quantitative research also that I've done with a research partner of mine, Matt Sweeney. All of that can be accessed very easily on Google, and I look forward to hearing from everybody.
Super. Awesome.